I'm really proud to be a feminist. It took me a while to get used to saying that, I am a feminist. And there's a lot of reasons why. The term has such a stigma to it. But I'm at a point in my life and in my career where I can absolutely, unequivocally say that I'm a feminist. I was recently approached by a colleague who asked me why. Why am I a feminist? And honestly, it kind of took me a second to think about it because there wasn't something that I just had right at the tip of my tongue that I could respond to that. But eventually I gave it some thought and I responded that, feminism is good for everybody. I benefit from feminism. People around me benefit from feminism. It doesn't matter what your gender is. And I think it's even more than that. I think feminism is essential for us to move forward as a society. I think we need feminism to kind of correct for some of the problems that our more patriarchal society has created for us. Now, obviously, patriarchy affects women directly, but it also affects men just as directly. And as a man, I've really, really benefited from feminism, from being able to express my emotions, from learning how to express my emotions, to learning how to express my emotions constructively. I've benefited from feminism because I have part of my personality that is very nurturing towards others. And with a feminist attitude and a mindset, I can let that nurturing attitude, that nurturing behavior kind of out. I can release that. Feminism has also really helped me express myself when I'm feeling weak or insecure, which happens, fairly regularly for, I think, everybody's life. And it's also made me a lot more comfortable acknowledging my dependence on others and asking others when I need help. And those are just a few examples. There are probably so many more that I can't even think of right now. And there are concrete examples as well that happen on a daily basis that are benefiting me. Feminism also benefits me because it increases the diversity of my collaborators, which increases the number of perspectives that go into my work, which increases the amount of innovation and the kinds of knowledge that I'm able to produce, which means more impact. This is just a snapshot into kind of my life and how feminism benefits me. But I want to start at the beginning. I want to go back back to my childhood. Really, my whole family is made up of some of the strongest women I have ever met in my entire life. So from the time I was literally born, I had really amazing female role models, and I think that my entire journey since then has been affected by that one single fact. And so I'm really grateful and indebted to them for being who they are. And I know that they've come through a lot of really difficult experiences to be who they are, to be where they've arrived. So this includes my mother, obviously, but both of my grandmothers, nearly all of my aunts. They were all professionals. They were all entrepreneurs. Most of them were entrepreneurs. Most of them also ran their own household, so they were essentially working two full-time jobs, the kind of unrecognized job of running a household, as well as the kind of more formally recognized professions that they were involved in. And so I never really grew up with this idea that women are somehow inherently weak or that they're dependent. I never really thought about women in that way, from the time I was born, because I never saw it in my families. I never saw the women around me acting weak. I never saw them acting dependent. I always saw them being strong. And even in weakness, there was that strength. And even in behaviors that might have shown them to be dependent, they still crafted or created space for their independence. So it was always this kind of amazing juxtaposition of a woman's role and the kind of the non-traditional ways in which they occupied that role. So to me, women were always usually stronger mentally, emotionally, and sometimes even physically than the men in my life. One of my favorite stories comes from my grandmother, and the way my dad tells it is my grandmother was working, she and my grandfather had a diner in Philadelphia, and so they were working together one night, late at night, and my dad and my grandfather were back in the kitchen. And, they were just kind of monitoring the restaurant, just seeing how things going, and my grandmother was working in the front of the house, and this really belligerent drunk guy came in, sat himself down, and started shouting and just being obnoxious. And my grandmother came over to him and said, "Hey, you need to stop it, or I'm going to throw you out." And he started mouthing off to her and, cussing her up and down. And so he turned really aggressive towards my grandmother. My grandmother immediately punches him in the face, grabs him, throws him out on the street. And so this is kind of a story that I was told as a child about my grandmother, who, I'm sorry, she was a very, very petite woman. So you could never really imagine a scenario where she would go and pick up a grown man and kind of throw him out of a building. But that's exactly what she did. And so it was really amazing as a child to grow up with this imagination that your grandmother was bigger than life, that your grandmother, even though she was a very petite person, had this kind of sense of self, sense of strength, sense of purpose, sense of kind of defending her and her family to this guy who was just clearly out to be a nuisance. And all of the women in my family have similar stories where they've overcome kind of really challenging experiences, or they've kind of demonstrated their strength or their abilities really quite literally, quite in a way that really impacted me as a child. So growing up, kind of my relationship with women wasn't just about respecting them. It was really about these more traditional feminine qualities were never cast in a negative light for me. So when we talk about feminine qualities of, being emotional or expressing your emotions, when we talk about more traditional feminine qualities like that, I never associated that, being a woman, with something that was negative. I always associated it with something that was positive, that was about strength, that was about integrity, that was about purpose. And so I never grew up with this idea that femininity was negative or bad in any way, shape, or form. Now, take this with a grain of salt, because I did come from a Greek family, and a lot of my relatives were super traditional. But on the other hand, we have in a lot of Mediterranean families, you have a lot of men who can be very, very, very emotional. And I'm one of these men. I express myself emotionally a lot. And so it was a really interesting juxtaposition of having these more traditional patriarchal value systems at a kind of higher level, but then these really strong, amazing women kind of just working against those value systems in a lot of respects. And then with these men who kind of were, in a lot of ways, adopting more feminine behaviors because of this, kind of grandiose emotional displays that they would end up having. So the issue was never really cut and dry for me of understanding what feminism meant or what it means to be a feminist, because there was such a diverse range of roles that I experienced in my family's lives. Of course, my journey as a feminist didn't end there by any stretch of the imagination. I had a lot of amazing women, professors, bosses, supervisors, you name it, a lot of both men and women who guided me, and I thank them to the end of the day for being forgiving of me whenever I would betray my biases or my internalized misogyny by saying something stupid or for acting in a stupid way. They really took time out of their lives to educate me, and I am eternally grateful to them for doing that, because if they hadn't, I would have just continued down a path of ignorance, and I think my journey would have been a lot different. So I owe them a huge, huge debt of gratitude for taking their emotional energy, for their psychological energy, and for their time to educate me and to teach me how to be just a better person in general. So throughout my life, I really learned what it means to be a feminist, and I am by no means done learning, and I'm by no means the kind of epitome of a role model of a feminist. I still have a lot of internalized misogyny that I'm trying to work out. I still have a lot of biases that I'm trying to keep in check, and I still have a lot of time that I hope will be spent working with a huge diversity of communities to understand how I can be better, how I can be a more caring person, how I can be a more compassionate person, just how I can be a person who's more comfortable in my own skin, how I can be more comfortable expressing my feelings, how I can be more comfortable expressing what I need, especially in times of weakness or insecurity, how I can more easily express my basic and most fundamental needs. Feminism gave me this opportunity to be able to do that, to be my whole person. And I think that's probably the most amazing thing about my journey. It enabled me to be not just a cardboard cutout of who society thinks I should be, but actually be my most authentic self. To be a person who's not imprisoned by society's expectations, but feminism has given me a chance to stand in my own truth and to express who I am. So the takeaway here is just that feminism is not just about empowering women, it's about empowering us all. The freedom that we get to be our most authentic selves comes from the activism, the advocacy that feminists do every day. We recognize that humanity is made up of a huge diversity of experiences, that there's not this dichotomy of you're either this or that, this or that, this or that. And it gives us a sense of dignity and purpose in our own lived experiences, because it doesn't just recognize half of our experience, it recognizes the full spectrum of our experience. And so I don't just get valued as the person that brings home the resources and that, has, no emotions. I get recognized for the full spectrum of who I am. And that's something that benefits everyone. My name is Anthony, and I'm a feminist.